Now, at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the hands of Stephan. He's going to introduce the next panel, and they're going to tell us how we're going to be able to scale Bitcoin off-chain. Stephan.
Thank you very much. All right. So we're doing 2 in a row for me, but we're bringing on some of our guests. So we've got Matt Corallo. He is at Square Crypto, and he's working a lot on Rust Lightning, and in the past has done a lot of Bitcoin core contribution. We've got Niftynei, Lisa. She's from Blockstream, working on C Lightning and dual funded channels and things like this. We've got Graham from Voltage. He's the CEO and founder, doing Lightning nodes, Bitcoin nodes hosted for businesses or individuals. And we've got Alex Bosworth, infrastructure lead, is it, at Lightning Labs? So Alex is infrastructure lead at Lightning Labs. Well known for Lightning contributions, submarine swaps, yours.org are probably some of your big projects and things. So guys, thanks for joining us. We're talking about off-chain scaling. And so obviously Lightning is the first thing that comes to our mind, but maybe it'd be good to, maybe we could start with this idea of what is off-chain scaling. I think, Lisa, you had something to add on this, didn't you?
We had a meeting in the back and we decided we were moving Lightning to Tron. And so we think that'll scale Lightning better.
Right. Yeah.
And I think kind of, when you talk about off-chain Bitcoin transactions, like where do things like custodial, like if you have like an exchange, right, like a centralized exchange, like how many Bitcoin transactions are happening? Like, would you call those Bitcoin transactions? Maybe this is like a little off topic, but I think it's interesting to bring those up because it's like, okay, there's a lot of Bitcoin transactions that are happening across the ecosystem. Like some of them, maybe we could say happen on ETH, the like wrapped ETH stuff. Some of them happen in centralized exchanges or on the Cash App, just between two like users or whatever. But I think like on the panel, what my understanding of what we're going to be talking about on the panel today is like what I would call like non-custodial, I don't know, how would you guys describe what kind of like the projects that we work on?
I think it's scaling kind of the properties of Bitcoin. So you want to have the property of anybody can enter it, and you don't need a central party to run it, and nobody can kind of revoke your thing. You have privacy. Like you want to get all those great benefits, but you also don't want to have the trade-off of like, oh well, if it grows too big, then we have to we have to become expensive.
Yeah, and I would elaborate on that a little bit of really scaling in a Bitcoin native way, where when you talk about scaling through exchanges or those custodial services, that's not like a Bitcoin native way. That's kind of the old way of doing things that are have their place, I guess. But when think about Lightning Network and whatnot, is scaling things that still keep the ethos and the assurances that the base layer brings, and just enabling more things on top of it.
Yeah. Matt, do you have anything to add there? Or
no, I thought that hit the nail on the head.
Excellent. So I guess Lightning is probably the big one that most of you guys on stage are kind of working on now or known for. So maybe if we could just compare, what do you sort of think the possibilities are with the Lightning Network? People might, as an example, compare the Lightning Network to the payment processors of the world, the Visas, the MasterCards of the world. How would you compare them from a capacity or even transactions per second point of view?
Take that, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we still don't know. Like the jury's still out to a large extent. The jury's still out in a lot of contexts on how far Bitcoin can scale. But Lightning has this weird like concept of pre-committed capacity, and you can only send as much as the channel has capacity, and like doing adding or removing capacity you could do, but that takes an on-chain transaction. And so there's a lot of different games you can play around how you allocate different capacity and how that impacts your on-chain transaction volume. And you see a lot of users who use some of these kind of mobile Lightning apps, like Moon, Breeze, Phoenix, whatever. You receive funds, and a lot of the time that ends up with an on-chain transaction. And so then it's a question of, what is the ratio of on-chain to off-chain? And it depends a lot on user behavior. And then you have to create a bunch of complicated heuristics on the server side to decide how to allocate your capacity among your users. And these are just like, Lightning is still early, and so the user behavior is going to change materially, especially over the next, year or two. And so anything that works now might not work in a year. And either way, both today and in the future, this is a fundamentally hard problem. It's like kind of hard to create heuristics to allocate capital to where it's going to be needed in the future. And if you get it wrong, it means more on-chain transactions, and maybe there's enough on-chain capacity, and maybe that's okay, or maybe there's not. And then maybe suddenly fees are going up, and you're paying a lot of money for that. And so, obviously Lightning can scale Bitcoin, 10x from where it is with just on-chain, or maybe it's 100x, or maybe it's 1000x, but like we just don't know yet. And it depends a lot on solving, engineering questions, but more fuzzy engineering questions that don't have a concrete answer. And if you get it right, then it works really well. And if you don't get it right, maybe you end up with a lot of on-chain transactions.
Yeah. So maybe as an example, you could get like a 10x improvement, or maybe it might be literally thousands in terms of how much you can pack into one transaction. I mean, just as an example, I saw Nicholas Bertie from Galoy and the Bitcoin Beach wallet. Now, granted, the Lightning aspect of it is custodial, but as an example, he mentioned there were something like 14,000 transactions in like a week or so, and that's like 5,000 or 10,000 users, and the amount of on-chain transactions was like 14.
Right, and if you pass it through a custodial service, you get a lot better. Right? Yeah, it's like it's when you have kind of the end users with their own channels that it gets very complicated and starts to have scaling questions. If you're talking about how do you accelerate transactions and moving funds between one custodial service and another, between exchanges, so people can arbitrage or whatever, suddenly you're talking about you just open a big fat channel and maybe you do one transaction a day, and it doesn't really matter how much capacity you have enough liquidity for it, and suddenly it scales basically ad infinitum.
Yeah. Anyone else on the panel want to add something?
I think I wanted to kind of add on to something that Matt said. It's kind of like when you're comparing speed, you kind of have this trade-off between the off-chain things off-chain, which are fast, and then on-chain, and how much of a mix of your transactions end up being off-chain versus on-chain, and kind of maybe put some time scales around those. So in theory, on Lightning, when you're doing off-chain transactions, how fast does that go? The answer is as fast as your computer can send and receive messages, and maybe write some things to disk. So at that point, it's at that point, it's not even at that point, kind of I want to say the best case scenario of an off-chain transaction, you're looking at physical limits of your hardware and your computers and your network and your computer system.
Speed of light.
Yeah, speed of light. And then when you start bringing in the on-chain transaction things, at that point you start looking at congestion of the entire network, right? How many other people are attempting to transact on chain at the same time? How fast are blocks getting mined at that particular time period? How much are you willing to pay in order for that transaction to go through? And so that as soon as you start heading into the on-chain territory, kind of the constraints about what your speed of transaction kind of changes a little bit. So in theory, if everything was off-chain, right? If you could have all of your transactions be off-chain transactions, then it's the speed of light, and it's the speed of light. It's the bandwidth that your computer is physically capable of processing. And to compare that to Visa, I think Visa has some really nice hardware. They run mainframes, etc. So their hardware that they're running their transactions on is quite great. I'm assuming they have pretty large.
Yeah, Raspberry Pi Lightning nodes hang all the time. They just sit there and spin for a good few seconds, and then they'll forward the payment maybe.
Yeah. So that's totally, I think, a different way of looking at it, but it's definitely, I think, an interesting way of comparing maybe the Visa network to how Lightning network works. I think another thing that's interesting about the Visa network, so this is totally kind of I really like looking at things at sort of the nuts and bolts level. The Visa network is really a couple of nodes at a couple of banks across the country. So the total number of computers that you're having to touch to run a Visa transaction is probably less than 10. I would be surprised if it's more than half of that, right? Kind of in that order of magnitude. In theory, depending on how well connected your Lightning payment is, maybe you're talking to a similar number of computers. But,
right. And given the multi-hop nature of the Lightning Network, you're waiting for this back and forth for that as well. Graham, Graham, I wanted to throw it to you just around because some of the earlier comments as well were about how might it work on, let's say, a lower powered device? But also you're working on this idea of hosted nodes as well. So maybe you could touch on that a little bit, and maybe the difference and maybe the capacity of, say, the hosted node aspect versus, let's say, everyone running on a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Where when you think about Lightning and running your own nodes and things like that, what's nice about the Visa network or whatever is Visa handles all of that for you. If you're running your own node, well, you are kind of responsible for how fast your node can process payments. And it is, much like you said, it's kind of your own bottleneck. You are resource constrained by, your Raspberry Pi, or if you're running it in the cloud on some bigger server, you can probably do more payments. So it does have a much more direct relationship between, the size of your node or the hardware that's running on, to be able to figure out how fast you can transact. So, when we think about like running nodes for like a business or someone that has like, needs, they want speed, they want really high success rates on their payments, things like that. We'll put them on faster hard drives, bigger servers, because they might have 100 channels and they need it to function really well. And maybe an individual doesn't need the same assurances. They can run it cheaper and way to have a little bit smaller payments. Yeah. So it's really just all about like what you are trying to get out of it and what your experience wants to be. You want it to be. And then additionally, touching on what Matt kind of said earlier too, is a lot of this is like still being like actively developed. So I think that a lot of like the ways that we transact on the Lightning Network today might shift. I think that a lot of it will be fairly similar, but I think a lot of this is still evolving, and there's still a lot of things that are being developed to enhance the network as a whole. So I think that there's a lot of improvements that can still be made on top of the network, as we grow it.
Yeah. There's one when we talk about like how quickly can you push payments through. There is a trade-off here that may be worth mentioning, and that's privacy, right? So if you deliberately delay the payments, you might actually be able to get some real privacy on Lightning from an adversary who sees kind of the timing of payments flow through the networks. This is kind of a common problem in Tor and other anonymity networks that rely on kind of bouncing something around through a network to get privacy. Is that, well, if you see a payment come from here and go to here and come back, and it all happens at the same time, and there's not really many other payments at the same time, you know exactly who sent it and who received it and where it went. And so there is going to be some tension going forward in the Lightning Network about kind of how much do you delay a payment to get some kind of batching factor versus how much is that going to cause a payment to be delayed, and how much privacy does that gain, and what is your kind of policy around that. And I think this is also an interesting open question that we'll have to figure something out.
Yeah, I think the privacy aspect's an interesting kind of thing. So when we're comparing to like like differences between like on-chain or off-chain, right? The privacy story on Lightning is quite different than the privacy story on-chain, right? Because the on-chain, all of your transactions are written into a giant ledger. There's this like, you're kind of hoping that at some point in the future, no one figures out who your public keys belong to because it's all on-chain. So like, there's kind of always this like retroactive threat that someone could figure out what your transaction history was and who you're transacting with, just because of the way that blockchains are kind of permanent records. Whereas on Lightning, the privacy of your payments is a lot more. It's all off-chain, right? So because what does it mean when it's off-chain? It kind of means that the movement of funds is like sort of ephemeral, and that you don't really keep track of who's sending money to who. And, we have this privacy thing that makes it as much as possible difficult to tell where the payment originated from and where it's going to after the payment is completed. There's really no record of it other than
only the nodes that are involved in the direct payment learn about it. And the only record is what they've written into their private data stores. So if you, for some reason, had it such that you were deleting certain payment data, it's kind of difficult to do. No, you could delete. Like, how much can you delete with like the revocation stuff, right?
Isn't that like an L2? Once we're in an L2 world, that would be better, right?
I think that's right.
That's the main.
L2, but also even Taproot, the PTLCs, you get at least a unique identifier for your node, so it's a little better.
Yeah.
So this is like also gets into like payment decorrelation and stuff. But Alex, we haven't heard much from you. Let's hear a little bit from you. I know you're obviously very involved in terms of, or at least you were a pioneer in terms of people swapping on and off chain. Maybe you want to touch a little bit on that for us. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was said before, but like you have the limitation of flow constraints in the Lightning Network. So kind of like your bottleneck in terms of like transmission speed isn't that, how many signatures can you do? It's like how much Bitcoin do you have that needs to flow in a certain direction? So that's kind of the thing that I worked on a lot is like, how can we bring the benefits of both? Like, you have, when you hit a flow constraint, like how do you deal with that? Like, and if I look at my own nodes, like I have millions of states on my past channels, and I've made probably well under 1,000 Bitcoin transactions. So like the scaling factor there maybe is 1,000x. But if I look maybe over the past year, I've probably forwarded maybe $15 or $16 million, but that's versus $4 million worth of capacity that's deployed to the node. So the factor of scaling is really for smaller payments where you can just do a signature, and the difficulty where we need tooling, we need better market systems, is where you go from like, how much can I stretch this capital that I've deployed? I've deployed this amount of money and I need it to power, a huge size in terms of volume. And that's kind of like the limit of the Lightning Network.
Yeah.
A few thousand sats payments always work. A few million sats payments, and not so much.
Not so much right now.
But you could, so I think Alex brings up a really good point in terms of capacity for the Lightning Network, or like any L2 really that's using. So L2s are built using, I would call them like pools of like, they're like, Lightning's like lots of little bitty pools of Bitcoin capital that's been locked into these channels, right? So at some point, in terms of the actual dollar volume of transactions that are able to happen in Lightning is going to be a function of the amount of Bitcoin that's been committed to the like layer 2 thing. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. What fraction of that Bitcoin is going to make itself available to be locked into channels is like a big question. And then once you have it like locked into channels, is it locked into places that like are actually usable? Because it's really hard to predict where. Well, I don't know how hard it is to predict where payments are going to go. Maybe it's quite trivial, but having capital deployed to the right places is I think also going to be a bit of a factor there. It's to like compare it to Visa, because I think this is kind of interesting. So Lightning is kind of a factor of how much of Bitcoin is locked into Lightning channels, right? Visa, like how much transaction volume they can do is a function of how much credit has been extended to the people that hold Visa cards, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of it's a difference of kind, right? It's credit versus actual settlement. So it's like, that's a big, big difference. And I think a lot of people don't grasp that. And for all we know, it could be that, the fees on, Lightning fees probably will rise. And so it's like a similar thing. I think Rusty has given a talk on this idea as well, that in the early days of Bitcoin, it's cheap and free and, it's fast. But actually in Lightning world, that may change, and people will need to understand the category difference that Lightning is actually settlement. It's not credit.
Well, and you can see, a lot of the like mobile Lightning wallets that are non-custodial, when the LSP has to extend their liquidity to you for you to receive a payment, like some of them actually charge reasonable fees. I mean, it's still lower than Visa by a large margin, but they charge significantly higher fees than, people running around saying like Lightning is free, it's great, and we'll see how that shakes out, what the cost of capital is. But it's not completely free, and it remains to be seen exactly where that lands.
Yeah. Graham, I'm curious if you've got any views around, so part of what we were talking about earlier is not knowing where that payment is going, and I guess part of what you're doing as well with Voltage is around spinning up a node for somebody, and I don't know how much channel management goes into that as well for them. How do you think about that kind of challenge or that problem?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to come up with solutions to make that easier as we go. We definitely try and help our customers as much as we can with channel management and deploying where they need it to be, depending on what their use case is. But I think that maybe I'm a little bit like over optimistic here, but I think that there will be a day where the tooling will be so good that you don't really have to think about channel management as much as you do today. Like when you create a node, the first thing you have to do is create a channel before you can even send a payment. And I think that we'll get to the point in tooling where a lot of it will be abstracted away, and you can get up to speed much easier and quicker than it is today. And so we're working on some tools to make that easier for people to connect with others and get channels in the network and get up to speed faster. So it's really, it kind of goes back to the the comments you guys were saying about, where do you deploy your capital on the Lightning Network, and it's really just a function of what your objectives are. And I think that there's going to be a lot of innovation in that space, like what a lot of Alex works on. I think that there will be a lot of tooling to make this less of a problem than it is today.
Yeah. So Alex, I'm curious, what are the hopes then on, as an example, L&D, like autopilot, or this kind of idea of, node scoring, so that okay, when I spin up this node, who am I going to open my channel with? What are the hopes for automation?
Well, from my perspective, I kind of see specialization as the answer, where you are running a node, but you don't necessarily need to be a routing node. So if you're the end user, then you connect to a routing node, and there's a big selection for you. Anybody can be a routing node, but you don't need to do that yourself. And I think that that's how the market will mature over time. Is also on the other side, if you're a merchant, you don't necessarily need to operate a routing node as a merchant. You can focus on just being a great merchant, and you can connect to a variety of routing nodes, evaluate them for performance. And that's one thing that I definitely work on, even as a routing node, is evaluating performance. Is this routing node actually delivering good service to me? And that's where I see a lot of useful automation tooling coming around, because you have so much data. Like, this node forwarded this many payments to me, and this node, hasn't been active for a while, or it's a source of errors. So I think that there'll be more automation around using your own data to solve your own problems.
Yeah. I'm curious, Matt, what's the approach there around Rust Lightning?
So we're obviously work in a very different market segment than LND or C Lightning. LND and C Lightning are designed to be a node that you can operate, that maybe they have some tooling, maybe there's some good plugins for doing all kinds of automation and whatnot. LDK, the Lightning Dev Kit, and Rust Lightning, which kind of powers it, are much more kind of a toolkit with which you can build a Lightning node, not necessarily a Lightning node. And so that's kind of targeted at so we've had a number of conversations with people around people who want to build mobile Lightning experiences and that kind of thing. And there you're talking much more about kind of Lightning service provider models, where you're going to run C Lightning or LND on your server to be a routing node for your clients, and then the LDK node will be configured to only open channels with that, or maybe do zero-conf channels, or all kinds of additional features you might provide. And so we leave it up to the user. We don't currently do any work in that space directly, because we have users who have very different models, and Alex does a good job with various scoring here, and users can just use that and not have to.
Yeah. And Lisa, I'd love to hear a bit more from you with the C Lightning and Blockstream approach. Could you tell us a little bit about liquidity advertisements? Like, what are they? How do they work?
Oh, yeah. So liquidity advertisements. So this is kind of in the theme of, there's only going to be so much Bitcoin available, and of all the Bitcoin available, only so much of it is going to be interested in making itself available to Lightning capacity, so to speak. So given this assumption that there's a subset of Bitcoin that wants to be deployed to the Lightning Network, but needs help figuring out where to deploy itself to, the idea with liquidity ads, it's a Lightning spec proposal, so our hope is that it'll get adopted by other implementations and then be part of the Lightning spec, so anyone who runs a Lightning node will have access to it. But what it does generally is it allows for anyone who runs a node to advertise that they have Bitcoin on their node that they're willing to allocate to channels with other nodes. So if you start up a new node, you can basically start gossiping with the other peers. You collect all of these liquidity advertisements that any other node on the network is advertising. You can see who's advertising it. You can maybe talk to some data providers about, hey, tell me about this node. What's its reputation like? How much should I value as a node in the network with my inbound liquidity needs? How much should I value what they're offering me? And then decide, basically, you pay them for the service of them giving you inbound liquidity. And for those of you who are inbound liquidity, for those of you who aren't really familiar with Lightning terminology, basically is the ability to receive payments. So this is when you open a channel, the other side of the channel needs to have funds on it so that whenever you receive a payment, those funds can be pushed to you. So basically, this gives you a way to source from any node on the network. currently only nodes that are running C Lightning and like have the stuff set up exactly correctly. But hopefully in the future, any node in Lightning Network that wants to be able to advertise liquidity will be able to, and then any node that wants to be able to purchase some inbound liquidity from them will be able to do it. So it's very decentralized. There's no centralized market. You kind of have to decide how much you want to price your liquidity at on your own. We don't really have like a lot of help for that. But it is like super decentralized, and hopefully it allows people in the market who have liquidity the ability to kind of like set up a signal such that people who are looking for inbound liquidity, if they're willing to pay for it, we hope that that means that they're going to make good use of it, right? Because clearly they have a use for it. So this is kind of a way of matching, kind of decentralized matching via billboard system, who has liquidity that they want to deploy and people who would like to make use of that, I think.
Yeah.
But I'll be giving a talk on it tomorrow morning if you want to learn more about how they work.
Excellent. Maybe a little bit out there as well, like as an example with El Salvador, right? There's 6 million people who are coming onto the Lightning Network. You guys are all working on the Lightning Network in some way, shape, or form. Do you have any thoughts on that? Does that represent like a stress test of Lightning, or do you think it's early days and there's essentially still a lot of on-chain usage? They're not really using as much Lightning yet.
I think, it is a good stress test, like just to get more people using it. I mean, you're going to find, where the needs are of the people and what needs to be fixed and all those things. So it is a good stress test, but I think like a large amount of the like El Salvador stuff is custodial right now, so it's not necessarily stressing the lower level, like the network itself a lot, but it's really, helping a lot of people that are starting to use nodes in a much more serious way, I guess, instead of just, having these small nodes that do a few payments a day or something. They're actually doing like substantial payments. So I think that it is a good stress test. It's any usage is good. I think that right now it's more testing the implementations themselves than like the network itself right now, which is good. I think that we can. That's a natural step in evolving the network, is helping us figure out where where are the gaps at in these implementations, and then also in the tooling, all of these things.
Right. We're still obscenely early in Lightning's lifetime. Certainly, volume of payments wise, and also, if people saw the CVEs that came through a few weeks ago, which can kind of best be described as like prior to a few weeks ago, the security model of Lightning included you shall not open a Lightning channel with any Bitcoin miners. And even today, depending on the exact channel type, that's maybe a little true, right? So like the security model of Lightning still has a long way to go, and we're still tightening a lot of issues up. So we're still, which kind of the point about custodial wallets, like to some extent today with Lightning, if you want to open a reasonably large amount of funds into a channel that you want those funds back, you probably kind of want to know your counterparty, or at least know that your counterparty is not actively malicious or not going to, put in some amount of work to steal your funds. Like this, we're getting there. We're getting there quickly, but we're still getting there. And at least make sure they're not a miner.
Anything else you guys wanted to add around that?
I think that the whole system is kind of the network. That I don't think I think it is a stress test of like, how easy is it for developers to get up and running? How easy is it for users to get going? So I definitely see the stress right now. Like, we're talking to people in El Salvador who are deploying, and, they don't necessarily care about the technical details. They just need to provide the solutions to people. And I think we do have a lot of people who are falling back to the chain because this is a brand new, system that they have to like just suddenly wake up and support. And the people who were there already were more familiar with the chain. The chain has, the benefit of 10 years of all sorts of libraries and, simple ways to access it. And so we have to do everything from the network layer all the way to the user layer to scale that up.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's important to point out kind of like more differences between on-chain versus off-chain, and like why is on-chain so much easier, I think, to deploy and get set up and running, is the level of like technical know-how that you need in order to interact with any like layer one typically is a lot lower than anything that you need to like run and operate like a Lightning node. And the reason for that is that like a lot of the burden of storing state, maybe that's just the whole thing. The whole burden of storing state really, and like the connectivity is like really abstracted away from you as like a transactor. So like you as a transactor, like all you really have to do is kind of keep track of like a few pieces of data on the chain. If you lose it, you can like, for the most part, as long as you have like your secret seed key, be able to like figure it out again because someone else is keeping track of it. That someone else is like all the Bitcoin nodes in the network that have like the full block history. Whereas on Lightning, there's like so much more complexity because all of a sudden, and this is like one of the big trade-offs between layer ones and layer twos is that layer one is, and the reason they're so slow is that the state, which is like all the history of the transactions, is kind of in one big place and everyone knows it and you share it with everyone. And so like everyone knows what the state is or the history is all together. Whereas L2, the way that you get these like speed ups is that all of a sudden there's like this like localized little history or state that you need to remember. And that takes like some level of infrastructure. Like you've got to have like a node set up running and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it is a lot more infrastructure heavy, I think, to run L2s just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that like that's I think that's the biggest challenge maybe is even people that are familiar with Bitcoin, Lightning is like just so different than on-chain Bitcoin. Like there's still kind of a hurdle of just learning it and figuring out all of the details. So I think it's that's one just challenge is that this is still Bitcoin, but it's just they operate so much differently that it's still a big learning curve.
Yeah, you still can't receive funds while offline.
Yeah.
Right. So everyone coming, especially those coming at it from the on-chain world where they're like, yeah, we have this address, we can like hand it to someone and then you can like send funds whenever. And then suddenly you're like, whoa. The recipient has to be online at the same time as the sender. And suddenly they're like, wait, what? You want to do? How do we build a user experience around that? And then, there's a lot of these things that just require even fundamentally rethinking your user experience in a way that people will take some time to come around to.
Yeah.
From an infrastructure perspective, I know that some of the exchanges are they're getting more advanced around how they do their Lightning. So, I mean, probably the well-known exchanges who do Lightning, Bitfinex, River, OKCoin, I believe. I know Kraken have said they're going to do it soon. But anyway, the point is they are doing approaches like saying having one node in front and one node behind. What do you guys think that looks like as you were saying, like people who are trying to support El Salvador or elsewhere, they're trying to build more, I guess, professionalized level Lightning stacks. What does that look like as compared to, let's say, the typical kind of one guy with his Raspberry Pi, one guy with his box at home kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that we're working on that evolution now, where previously no one was really putting any sizable amount of money on the Lightning Network, and it was fine to just be on a Raspberry Pi or whatever. And now people are putting real money, like large amounts of money, on the network. And so I think that that's being looked at. I think by both of all of the implementations and figuring out what is the best security models to do, like access controls for your node and being able to keep your keys, even they have to be online, but like in a separate server or something. So I think that is kind of the next phase of infrastructure, in my opinion, is making this more being able to run it with the same assurances that you kind of get like when you like think about a bank or even just doing like cold storage on layer one Bitcoin. And just being able to bring in a lot of that same security into the Lightning Network is really, I think where things are headed next.
Yeah.
Good.
I was going to say, this is like one of the projects that we're working on at Blockstream right now that I'm really excited about is this project called Greenlight. And what's so cool about that from its infrastructure perspective is that we're proposing so for Lightning, there's every time a transaction happens, you need keys to be online to sign Bitcoin transactions. So this is just kind of the way that Lightning works. It's basically all hot wallets. I don't know if I would say that too loudly, but every Lightning node is basically a hot wallet. So all the funds, and that's because in order to make use of funds in Lightning channels, you need to be producing signatures for transactions, which means you need keys. So what Greenlight is proposing to do, which is really exciting, is we basically take this requirement for the keys and we move it to maybe someone's cell phone or like a browser extension or some remote, like a computer that isn't clearly isn't going to be processing thousands of transactions or like doing anything super crazy. And then we can move the kind of liveness node requirement to like a big backend. So we would basically have like almost like the AWS of your Lightning node. And when you receive a payment, we spin up a node for you and contact your keys and ask for your keys to sign a thing. But in general, like all of the infrastructure of the actual node, keeping up with like what payments are coming in for you, that sort of stuff, you can kind of abstract away from the maintenance of like the funds, et cetera, which is, hopefully that'll make it easier to scale Lightning infrastructure.
Right, and shout out to Dev Random and Ken Zedrick, who are working on actually enforcing policy constraints on those signing devices and the work that they've done on Lightning Signer project.
Yeah, and I recall another kind of related idea. The guys at CoinCorner did this thing called Hofline Wallet, and it's like two. It's like, I think it's two Raspberry Pis, and the idea is it's like a funny little way of having a warm wallet, let's call it, and you could set up policy rules and. Yeah, sort of related to the idea of having like a Lightning warm wallet, if you will.
Right. I think the signer folks want to do similar stuff like that. I think they're working on replacing it in the HSMD and C Lightning, and you can do it in LDK, and being able to enforce policy constraints on the device that's signing, which is separate from the device that's doing stuff like, making TCP connection and actually being exposed to the internet and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I guess there's also all these kinds of considerations around things like redundancies or backups as well, and also latency. So if you've got another node behind another, and Lightning's meant to be fast payments, right? And so if it's actually behind another layer, then every time you're routing, maybe that's a slowdown in the speed as well. So I guess these are some of the engineering challenges people are working with, right?
And there's big liquidity considerations there too, right? And we've seen different companies explore different models, right? Where, if you're a large merchant or a large exchange, you might run one big node and like have big fat channels with everyone else on that one node. Or you might, I know Zap, like every time you create an invoice, it gets put against a different node, and they have a bunch of nodes on the back end that are all freestanding nodes that have their own channels, and you have to make sure you send to the right node, or obviously the invoice does this, but you can only send to that one of their nodes and not all of their nodes. And there's trade-offs there. There's models where you maybe have multiple nodes, but you can generate an invoice that works across all of them, but then you can't use MPP, and so maybe that doesn't work for larger payments, but maybe for smaller payments. There's still a lot of exploration to be done, and a lot of different models that people are exploring and trying, and we'll see where things shake out and what works for people and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to hear a little bit more about dual channels. So Lisa, do you want to tell us a little? Sorry, dual channel funding rather.
Yeah. So this is a spec proposal that Liquidity Ads requires basically. We also call it it's channel V2 basically. So V2 opens. So this has been a kind of a long-running project of mine to change how the spec for Lightning works, just for when you're opening a channel. The biggest change is that in the past, or current day, I should say, when you open a Lightning channel, only one side of the channel basically has one side of the channel constructs a transaction, figures out what the funding transaction is going to look like and where the funding output is, and then tells the other peer. And that's at the protocol layer of Lightning. So this is the protocol that every Lightning node speaks. So what we've done on C Lightning is we've changed the underlying protocol such that now when you open a channel, both sides construct a transaction together. And this ability to construct this channel together at the same time means that both sides have the opportunity to put funds in it. So currently, when you open channels with things like LND or with async, only one side will have funds on the channel. But on C Lightning, if you use the fund channel and you're both using the V2, if you both have V2 enabled, both sides will have the opportunity to put funds in the channel at the beginning of it. And this means that you can immediately send and receive payments in the same channel. It's only a single on-chain transaction, which is really nice. So it's really lightweight. So you kind of get this deployment of capital from two different sides, all in a single transaction. And we've actually written the protocol in such a way that C Lightning has this command that's been in there a long time called multi-fund channel, which lets you open multiple channels in the same transaction. And we extended it to work with this V2 version. So you can use multi-fund channel, and if you're using Liquidity Ads, so Liquidity Ads is a coordination mechanism for the V2 channel stuff. So basically that's a way to let people know to put money in the channel for you by paying them for it. So you could, in theory, like I say in theory, but I haven't done it, but you could definitely do like a multi-fund channel where you lease funds from like 5 different channels all in the same transaction. And so you would open 5 channels that are like balanced to whatever degree you wanted them to be, all like in like a single transaction on chain.
So there's a lot of batching saving there in that way, because now instead of, let's say as an example, I wanted to open a channel, one of each of you, that's 4 transactions on chain I'm doing. But in that model, let's say we're all using C Lightning and we're all, then it could be like one channel I open, or one transaction to open 4 channels, one with each of you. So that's kind of like a cool batch saving.
And they'd all have funds in both directions, so you could immediately, in theory, send and receive through all of them at the like immediately, which is pretty cool. So we're pretty excited about it. The people that I know have used it seem to think it's pretty cool. It's very decentralized, so like all of this happens only between the nodes that are creating
they're collaborating
channel.
on the transaction.
Yeah, so it's really, I mean, like I don't have any stats on like, maybe I could get some stats, but I don't have like any stats on how many of these transactions have been done.
Might be interesting as well from a privacy point of view that it sort of starts to cut against some of the normal heuristics that are used. This idea that, common ownership heuristic, if actually now this one transaction represents like 5 people all creating a channels together, then it sort of starts to
and
mess
you
that
get
up a bit.
really, I think the privacy benefits start getting bigger when you like don't do change outputs. So if you put all of the money from your UTXOs into channels, then there's no change. Gotcha.
Yeah. So as an example, let's say we did that. Let's say I did a V2 channel with you, Lisa, and then I get some change, or it's stopping me doing a change output. That's probably the important one, because then right now, in terms of if somebody tries to change the value on the Lightning Network and Bitcoin on chain, they're looking at, hey, what was Stephan's change output? I see, that's his change output. Let me see where that goes next. I've got him now. But in this example, if you're just every channel open is a V2 channel, you're sort of taking away that heuristic. So that might be an interesting privacy benefit there, as well as a scalability aspect, because we're using Lightning. So that's an interesting one there. I know, Alex, you've got probably a similar idea there around batching as well, with like looping in and out, but for multiple channels at the same time, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, like sometimes people say like you can get a scalability benefit by taking a lot of different transactions and then merging them into one transaction. But actually you have to look at the inputs and the outputs. If I'm spending one input and making many outputs, that's way different from having many different transactions that are all spending one input and having one output and then just joining them together into the same transaction. So it's a difference probably between a 5% increase and it may be a 500% increase. So you kind of have to think about it like not just like, okay, I'm reducing the number of transactions, but I'm reducing the on-chain footprint. And that is the idea behind Loop. The idea is that you have very long-lived channels that, these are kind of staying around for a year or 2 years. But then you have liquidity needs, like maybe the balance has just shifted too much. And that also plays back to security needs. Maybe I don't need to have a big hot wallet because I'm a merchant. I need to get those funds over, but I don't want to just be closing all the channels with all my peers. I want to be maintaining those good channels that I have with them. So that's where we get a lot of usage. We say, okay, just find your set of peers who are delivering great service to you, monitor them, make sure that they're continuing to do that. That's a decentralized process. You can pick any peer you want. And then you use a loop service. And what we do there is we do batching. So we have mega inputs. We have the big input. And then we create swaps with all the people and we delay it. So we say, okay, you're going to, unless you pay us extra, we're going to match you with a bunch of other people and they're all going to make swaps, so many outputs and one input. And then with Schnorr, with Taproot disactivating, we'll be able to create new forms of how we actually create these swaps, so that we can represent everybody's keys in these swaps, but actually on chain, it's only going to be one key, one signature. So I think that's next year, that's something that we're investing a lot in, reducing our on-chain footprint there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, go on.
I had a question about the loop stuff. Well, 2 questions. So I've never used it, and that's because my understanding is it's LND only. Have you guys made it available for other Lightning implementations?
Actually, I've used it with C Lightning before, because the concept is just you get a payment request. So the idea is I get this payment request and it's locked to a hash, and then the server sends on chain some funds to the same hash. And what you need to do is you need to present the pre-image, so that the user creates a secret, and they use the secret to take the funds on the chain. And that's actually something that anybody can do, because the server has no idea who's paying. Like, that's an interesting aspect of how Loop works, is like we actually have no idea of who the customers are, because they're all paying us through the Lightning Network. So all that we see is we generated a payment request, somebody paid the payment request, and somebody swept it on-chain. So there's multiple implementations of actually the client, and we have like a reference implementation that does work with LND, and it's MIT licensed. But that's something that maybe we could explore in the future of like, how can we decouple it? And like, we have already done that with Loop-in. So the way that Loop-in works is you can use LND with it, but you could also use it with any any generic exchange. You can just have them generate an on-chain address, and then you send to the on-chain address, and you're auditing the on-chain address. You're saying, is this on-chain address actually an HTLC, and does it include my key, and does it include the correct pre-image and the correct secret? So that's something that we can maybe expand, although, yeah, we're working on lots of different projects.
Oh, my other question about Loop is, so you mentioned it was really useful when you have like a lot of peers to rebalance these the balances that you have with your existing peers. But again, and I brought up the fact that I haven't used it because maybe I don't know a lot about the current architecture of it. But do you guys only have like one node that is the Loop node? Because I would imagine that makes it difficult for all the nodes that are connected to it. If everyone's pushing money over to them to do loop outs or whatever, wouldn't that have an adverse impact on the balances of all the channels that were on that path to do rebalancing? The question is, do you guys only have one loop server, or do you have a bunch of them throughout the network?
Fewer loop servers is better from the cost perspective, because what we want is for the peers of the loop server to create enormous channels that can forward enormous amounts, and then close and aggregate all of those different loops into one on-chain transaction. And we also want to, of course, have the traffic flow in the other direction. But in order for traffic to flow bidirectionally, you need to have capital that is going to allow for wait time, because traffic isn't going to flow bidirectionally like every transaction. You're maybe going to have a buffer. And we also need to improve the services that we have and the pricing that we have around the movement in the other direction. So currently, we do have kind of a situation with a loop server where if you peer with a loop server, number one, you need to have a large channel. Our minimum channel size is the maximum channel size of the standard channel, and it's recommended that you probably do 10 times that. I would kind of think of it as if you have inbound liquidity that's in excess on your node. You have too much inbound liquidity. Loop is a great peer because you can charge a routing fee to pay to Loop. And we've seen develop is kind of like an organic market. Like, people recognize that, if I peer with Loop and I have a lot of excess inbound liquidity, I can reduce my excess inbound liquidity. Somebody else who wants it is going to buy it, and they're going to buy it through me and pay me that. And that's also going to ripple out through the network. So their peers are going to have the same experience. Like, if too much traffic is going to them, they're going to have a similar experience. And that's kind of like the challenge of Loop. We can't just build like a one-on-one liquidity service. We need you to be able to get liquidity from the broad network. And it also ties like Lightning Labs' business model to creating a diverse network. What we want is for this liquidity to be something that you need to have as a global network, not just as you buy it from one peer and you only transact with them.
Yeah, very interesting to think about, hey? So it's quite a long panel, isn't it? We've got about 10 minutes left, so maybe let's start looking at some of those kind of more future ideas that might be interesting as well. Like, I know, for example, Christian Decker has written about this idea of like multi-party channel, like aka channel factories and things. Maybe you guys could tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that, or what do you see as the future of Lightning and off-chain scaling? Anyone?
Well, I mean, yeah, where to start? Yeah, I mean, channel factories are awesome. They obviously continue the constraint that everyone's online at the same time, and so that's particularly that's particularly annoying if you're trying to talk. One of the really great things about channel factories is you can talk about you're not talking about like large merchants who have a lot of liquidity and they can kind of put it in big channels. You're talking about like smaller amounts of liquidity that you want to be able to kind of more dynamically rebalance across channels. So maybe, individuals who have who want to create a payment pool and do liquidity sharing across channel factories and split that liquidity up across their channels dynamically. And sadly, once you start talking about individuals, you start talking about online requirements, and then things start to fall apart. It's like, well, I wanted to run it on my phone, and my phone's not always online, and so that falls apart pretty quickly. But we can save it. We can get back a lot of that utility with covenants. So features in Bitcoin on chain to enable much more expressive things, and we can use those as primitives to build much fancier Lightning models like channel factories. When we start talking about like large LSPs, you want to talk about like how far can you scale being a large LSP like Breeze or Moon or Phoenix or whatever. That's a really hard problem. How do you scale that liquidity? And how do you have and one thing you really want to be able to do, which you can't do again because this online requirement is dynamically rebalance your liquidity without on-chain transactions, or at least with minimal on-chain transaction footprint. And that there are a lot of potential avenues there that require covenants, where you can do a lot of really cool stuff, but you can't do it today with Bitcoin as it exists today. But hopefully we'll be able to do it with one of these like CTV or check sig from stack or check or tap leaf update verify. There's a few proposals in that space right now, and needs more engineering time and more research and more whatever to get there. But I'm particularly optimistic and stuff in that direction because again I guess I look at Lightning a lot because this is kind of where LDK fits into the picture. I look at it a lot through the kind of how do we get end users who don't actually want to buy a Raspberry Pi and keep it online all the time. I mean, I know maybe people in this room love that, but it turns out most people like to, use phones or whatever. How do we get them a good Lightning experience that's not custodial? And right now the answer is custodial or these LSPs that work, but you can't receive while you're offline. And like, there's a lot of hairy problems there. And how do we get them to be more capital efficient so that they can charge a lower fee? And so I view a lot of things through that lens, and there's a lot of upcoming work in that space that I'm excited about.
Yeah, very intelligent comment.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
I was just gonna say too. I think that there's also like a need as we do all of these kind of new things like on Lightning at the protocol level. There's also like a big need of like easier tools and like developer tools and all these things just to get up to speed on usability of Lightning. And we're working on a lot of things like in that department, and I think that that's just a big need across the network. Is there's a lot of protocol level improvements that can be done, but then also allowing people to get up to speed easier, but then also doing more like participating. Like maybe you don't want to be a big LSP and you want to like let others participate with like liquidity ads or pool or something like that, and leverage those to get liquidity for your users. I think there's just more tooling around the space outside of the protocol level that
totally,
is
and that's
working.
Yeah, that's a conversation we've had with some of our users. Is like, I want to add Lightning non-custodial to my wallet, and I don't want to be the one to run the LSP. And you're like, well, I mean, you could let your users do manual channel management and open with a bunch of different people, but like you can't do zero conf, and then like, how do we? Yeah. And so like, where is the open source LSP in a box? Like that's a long ways away. And like tooling like that, and how do we enable people to build, especially non-custodial experiences around Lightning that, obviously you guys are great with merchants and hosting stuff. And then when we talk about like end users, that's just like, it's a long ways away from really enabling developers to do that stuff from scratch without a ton of legwork.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is kind of a separate topic. So,
well, I was going to, you go. I'll end it with a question that I think will.
I just wanted to point out that some of the things that Matt was talking about for, we're an off-chain panel, but all of the improvements that Matt was pointing out are all on-chain improvements, right? So to some extent, a lot of the stuff that moves off-chain stuff forward really depends on improvements on the chain layer. So that's like definitely something that we're very happy that there's a lot of really smart and great people that are working on the layer 1 stuff. And I don't know, I think, covenants will be really interesting if that happens.
And package relay so we can finally fix Lightning's security model. Make Lightning actually secure.
Yeah.
We need hats.
What I was really curious about, because I haven't heard your comments on this, but Bolt 12, like yay or nay, too much? Like what are the thoughts on Bolt 12?
Bolt 12 is awesome. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I mean, we're going to talk about it in 15 minutes.
Nice.
We're going to have a chat with, well, not Bolt 12 specifically, but Andre, who skipped our panel, and I'm now mad at Andre. But Andre and I are going to chat about especially kind of receiving while offline, and this kind of like, issue that's propped up with like Twitter. You can only receive tips if you opt into a custodial service and KYC yourself. And like, how do we fix stuff like that? And I guess, from my naive view, before I had spent any time with Bolt 12, I was like, oh, Bolt 12 probably fixes a bunch of this stuff. And it's like, actually, no, Bolt 12 just, it was scoped smaller, and I think it's even gotten scoped even smaller. Like, I think Rusty now wants to talk about deploying it without recurrence. And so, to get it there, it's gotten scoped smaller, and a lot of the print, like, it relies on these onion message primitives, which I think are going to be critical. Like, I had this like back of the envelope proposal for doing offline payment receipts, or like partially offline payment receipts, which I think might be cool eventually. But like, first we need onion messages, and onion messages are also needed before Bolt 12. And so like, it's still kind of a ways off in that sense. And sadly, I think, I think all of the Lightning implementers have just been too busy with other stuff to spend a lot of time on spec, except for maybe C Lightning.
Async has a draft PR for offers.
Wait, what?
Async has a draft PR for offers.
Oh, cool. Yeah, they've had a little more time. Yeah, we've been like massively underwater. LND, I know, has been underwater on trying to like do more business stuff than or like work on Loop and other products than just like kind of work on LND moving the spec forward. And so, there's just been a lack of that, but they're trying to hire. I know C Lightning's trying to hire. We're trying to hire. So there's more headcount coming in that department. And then I think from there, hopefully we can accelerate some of that and get things like onion messages broadly supported. And then from there we can get, build new cool stuff based on it, like Bolt 12 and like maybe offline receipts. And then we can, there's so much to do on the spec department, and there's just so few resources there. And I think everyone with a Lightning implementation right now is hiring. So if you're an engineer and you know something about Lightning or want to learn about Lightning, talk to anyone with a Lightning implementation, because they have a job for you.
Yeah, I mean, even just the Lightning industry. I mean, people who are building, solutions like Voltage. There's so many opportunities to create new companies based on Lightning, and so many people who are already having companies. They need help to integrate Lightning and make it work.
I had a final,
comment.
I
think we're down to the last 5 minutes anyway, so let's just get a final comment, maybe a minute each. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to so we've been talking about on-chain versus off-chain stuff. I think one kind of fun way to think about L2 is L2s fundamentally require Bitcoin to be locked into them to make them functional at all. So in some ways, depending, I know people buy and invest in Bitcoin for a variety of reasons, but I just want to kind of maybe add to your list of reasons to invest in Bitcoin, and that is that at some level that is a way of participating in or kind of deploying capital to these layer 2 networks are going to require people who hold Bitcoin to commit it to these networks in order for them to succeed. And if you think that in the future Lightning Network will be a very big payment network, and there's going to be a lot of traffic, and as a Bitcoin holder, that means that there might be opportunities in the future for you to participate in maybe some of the fees that are generated through Lightning. That's very probably controversial or whatever, but I definitely think it's kind of interesting to think about when you're valuing what is a Bitcoin worth.
Yeah.
This poor guy's had his hand up for
if it's going to be quick, we got to wrap up in a couple. Yeah, if it's quick, let's just come up to the microphone just up there. Super quick though, because we've got about a minute left on this panel. So
I didn't have anything to close with anyway. So
hey, I was just curious.
I'll just say it. I'll repeat the question.
I was curious. What is the priority, or timeline to get Taproot? It seems like that's
as in on Lightning.
On Lightning, yeah.
So the question, just for the stream, what is the priority to get Taproot on Lightning?
I think again there is a significant lack. There is definitely not enough resources right now on Lightning spec implementation work. I think maybe with the exception of C Lightning, Lisa's gonna start kicking me here in a second. But they focus a little more on that, and I think others maybe have been behind on that because we've had other focuses and are trying to hire for that and then move that forward. There are so many spec changes coming in Lightning, messages and whatever. So I don't have a number.
And it's not
2
just,
weeks
it's
TM,
not
but
just one Taproot integration. There's many different ways that Taproot's going to interact with Lightning.
right.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about this a little more on the Socratic seminar tomorrow, I think. So come hang out.
Excellent. Well, guys, I think that's about all we've got time for. So can everyone put your hands together for our panelists, Matt, Lisa, Graham, and Alex? Thank you.